Welcome everyone to episode 13 of the Exoskeletons and Wearable Robotics podcast with Professor Tom Sugar and myself, Bobby Marinov, with the Wearable Robotics Association and the Exoskeleton Report. And today we have a very special guest, the founder of Auxivo, Volker Bartenbach. How do I pronounce your last name? Is it Bartenbach?
It's close enough. It's Bartenbach in German, but yes, it's as close as you can get without being a native German speaker, I guess.
So before we dive into today's episode, we have no new patrons, but I want to take the time to acknowledge our current VIP supporters, Rita Vasquez-Torres, Minmar, corporate level sponsors Humotech, Occupational and Volker Bartenbach. Wait a second, that's Bartenbach twice. Thank you so much for your support on Patreon and elsewhere. You've been a good friend to the Exoskeleton Report over the years.
You are more than welcome. I appreciate your work as well over the years, as you say.
Well, thank you. So the three of us have known each other for quite a bit since one of the very earlies.
I think 2017 we met, right? For the very, I think it was the second one in Phoenix where I actually presented the educational exoskeleton back then on stage as part of this innovation competition, or what was it called? The innovation?
Yeah, we had an innovation showcase.
Showcase, yes.
And it was fantastic. And I think you won that year with the innovation showcase.
Yes, the ETH won that year, and it kickstarted quite something. So that was a good start.
I'm not
and it was a nice place to meet. Yes.
If I'm not mistaken, you double won. You won the Judges Award and the Audience Award.
Yes, that was quite a very interesting and successful night. No, it was great. It was a great event. It was, I think, a great opportunity to showcase ideas. And I remember, Bobby, you actually motivated me to go there. I remember you reaching out to, I think, projects around the globe, who you might see would be a fit for this innovation competition. And amongst them was the education project. So the only thing I needed to do was basically to convince my wife that we move our vacation towards this direction of the world, and then we kind of made this happen. Yeah, that was very nice, and a very nice conference as well.
Yeah, and you were an excellent fit at the time. And to be clear, I had nothing to do with influencing the outcome of that competition. But at the time, I think you were just finishing your PhD with ETH Zurich in exoskeleton control.
Yeah, exactly. So I was maybe if you want, I can quickly give you a brief rundown of how this come to be in 2017 and maybe what came afterwards. Also, thank you for having me on this podcast. It's very quite nice to see how this is developing. I originally got an engineering degree in Germany, so in 2010. And then I worked there for 2 more years in robotics, also humanoid robotics, but also wearable robotics. So this is how I got a little bit into this field. And then I moved to ETH in Switzerland to pursue a PhD in exoskeletons, which I then finished very late 2016. And then in 2017, these projects started, including the educational exoskeleton EDUX, so that I remember you also picked up on the exoskeleton report, I think very early on, and then this progress step by step led to the presentation in Phoenix somewhere in summer, and then we took it from there. And yeah, this was just about when I finished my PhD in late 2016.
So your first official product was a STEM education exoskeleton kit.
Exactly. So this was already during the PhD. I got a little bit also involved, as most PhD students do. So you also get assignments in education. So I was involved in a couple of these classes and courses. And yeah, we also had exoskeleton classes, and we saw how the students got excited about it. And I told you the story before. We saw then that, exoskeleton STEM education hardware was really hard to get back in the day. So we said, okay, let's do something about it. Let's create a STEM education kit so that make this exoskeleton technology more accessible. And then, yeah, this was first a side project during this PhD, and then I decided back then that this is actually something that could be quite interesting. So I tried to commercialize it as one possibility to make it available to more people. And yeah, this was the first project. And then afterwards, a little bit later actually, so then we started, let's say, a bigger project, which then was more focusing on the occupational exoskeleton side, so the industrial exoskeleton side. So during my PhD, as many PhD projects we did a lot of different projects, some in medical applications, some are more basic research topics. And this also led to ideas in the industrial and occupational fields. And this is what I got the chance to get support from ETH back then, so financial support to pursue this project. which then over the course of a couple of years led to the incorporation of now the second company, the Auxivo, which was incorporated in 2019. And yeah, I'm heading this company ever since. Of course, at the beginning it was also very small. We then launched our very first product, a lift support exoskeleton, in early 2020, just in time for the pandemic, for the full outbreak of the pandemic. So that was a little bit unfortunate timing. We have exoskeletons that you need to present and fit to people, and you're not allowed to go to people. So that was a little bit of a unfortunate timing. But yeah, in 2021, 2022, when, let's say, normality come back, mostly at least, we then had the chance to reach more customers, talk to more customers, to go to trade fairs again, and now build this company since 5 years now. So this year we had just a 5 years anniversary of the company, since incorporation, since foundation. And yeah, we have launched a couple of occupational exoskeletons over the years now. We have 4 in total now that we sell to different markets. At Auxivo, we actually also continued the educational product line as a way to support also the community, to support educators as well, if they want to integrate exoskeletons into classrooms or STEM educations, that we have a low threshold offering that they can use if they want, they can modify if they want, but give a baseline. And yeah, no, so since the last 3 years, we have seen significant growth. I think you know this best. The field is evolving, the field is also changing. But just recently, we also announced publicly that just this year in 2024, we also hit a milestone of 10,000 units deployed in the field. So this is really now it was a very successful year for Auxivo, and it's also a nice way how to see that the exoskeleton industry in total is progressing, is moving forward, is becoming more mainstream, so to say. Of course, we try something here and there, not everything works out well, but overall we see very positive progress across the field in this industry.
Well, congratulations on that milestone. Not too many companies have shared deployment numbers of that magnitude. That is a pretty big deal. So what I'm getting from this conversation is that you find the need and you try to fulfill that need. So I believe your original education was in medical exoskeletons. Then you saw a need that there really isn't all that much access for every single student who's interested in learning about exoskeleton technology to have access to it. And then you shifted your focus to the occupational industrial side and how to help workers retire healthy and be safer at their jobs. What led you to that? Like we can see the journey, but what led you to discover the need on the occupational side and to decide, yes, I'm going to do a company that focuses on that?
As you said, I think we identified the need, and funnily, I mean, we initially, most of the projects during my PhD had a medical background, so it was for people with some kind of physical impairment to support them. And this was also, it's a very nice field, also very interesting. So we also considered opportunities, if you want to maybe go more towards this direction initially. But it was actually quite interesting because already when I was still doing my PhD, we already got inquiries from companies, manufacturing companies, logistics companies, who actually got a little bit curious about the field. Construction company, there was a very direct email from someone who basically wrote us, hey, listen, you guys are researching these exoskeletons, my workers, construction business is hard, and it's getting actually even harder. People want to have bigger windows because they want to have more lights. People want to have thicker windows because the insulation needs to be better. And, my guy still needs to carry all of this stuff. Why is there not an exoskeleton for my people? So very directly, for some reason, he approached us in this regard. And there were multiple of these inquiries where people, were looking for solutions to lighten the workload for their workers, but did not find anything. So they were also actually looking left and right, and then they explored exoskeletons, they saw exoskeletons, but did not find any suitable on the market. So, and we had a couple of such contacts where sometimes we were approached by companies, sometimes we also actively approached companies. A friend of mine who I explored these topics initially also together, we were also had a contact at an airport baggage handling company, and he got us an appointment there, and we went there and presented just the idea of occupational exoskeletons, and they were actually quite very interesting and said this is something that could really help our people because the work they do has been done the same way since basically airplanes have been invented. So, and this would now be sounds like a nice idea how we could actually provide meaningful support to our workforce. So the interest was kind of there initially every time we asked, so the interest was there. But sometimes we were actively approached by companies who actually just themselves came up with the thought, that these exoskeletons, if you develop the right one, this could be something that could be very interesting for us. So this is where we then said, okay, that sounds very interesting. And back then, I mean, when we started this project, there were not many occupational exoskeletons out there. So there were some of the pioneers, like for example, Auxivo, I think was already active. I think not yet on the market, but already active. Then you had a couple of examples in Japan as well, but extremely limited and not any kind of bigger deployment. So we saw also that based on the interest from the industry, where we also clearly said, okay, there seems to be a clear need. And every time we talk to them, there seems to be a clear idea how they could use exoskeletons in their operations. And this is when we then started in a kind of a pilot phase to work together with these companies and go there very early, had different concepts, have different sketches sometimes only, but also brought them different prototypes and asked them, would this be something for you? Would this be something for you? And so on. And then we visited many of initially airports and construction sites to basically learn from them what their exact requirements would be. And out of this, we then slowly but steady built a variety of prototypes that then led to the first initial products that we eventually launched on the market. So this was why we transitioned there, because it was back then, there was already quite some offering in the field of medical exoskeletons, but occupational exoskeletons were really extremely limited at a point in time. And based on these conversations, we also saw simply a clear need or a clear opportunity that exoskeleton technology could have a really positive impact in these fields. And then it was basically step by step, one step after the other, prototypes matured over time. At some point in time, you realize, okay, this could be something. We started raising money, creating the company, and then taking it one year after the other. And, it led to where we are today.
Wow. So just to clarify to everyone, Auxivo is located in Switzerland, which I regularly misrepresent on Exoskeleton Report as Sweden. And Volker has had to email me multiple times that I got the country wrong. And I had the chance to be there last year, and the level of communication that I saw and cooperation is different from at least what I'm seeing in the United States. Tom, I would assume that you also don't have companies regularly emailing you if you have solutions for their workers.
No, but we've heard it. As an industry, we've heard agricultural is important. We've heard baggage handling, construction. Obviously, the classic, working in logistics warehouses are important. And then I think the last one that I think we hear a lot about is the automobile manufacturing, working above your head. A couple questions I would have is, what do you see as the most, for you, and, the industries that you think are most important? If, I listed out there, let's say military or logistics or agricultural construction. What do you see as some of the, places where exoskeletons are really being used a lot? They're like, people have decided, hey, this is important.
Yes, all of the ones that you mentioned. So I think these are really the usual suspects, I guess, in our field at the moment in time. Just a couple of examples that I would add from our experience. So agriculture is certainly something actually was, to our surprise, surprisingly big, honestly, to realize how much is still required there. And actually, this is a field where I have a little bit of, at least, I was exposed to, at least as a child. My parents always had horses. So we did the horseshoeing, and we were always paid to basically lift the horses, support the farriers in this regard. And now farriers actually is a not significant market in some of our geographical regions. So as a sub-market of agriculture. And of course, you have a lot of this harvesting, planting activities, landscaping activities. And of course, so you mentioned logistics, construction, any kind of manufacturing businesses, including car, trains, and so on, but also related to this repair, maintenance, facility management. These are things that are sometimes a little bit related. Healthcare, I would throw into the mix. Nursing staff, healthcare, elderly care. I think these are also interesting markets, also with very specific requirements sometimes, where you say, of course, the entire healthcare business, you need to cater then to sanitary issues. Can you wash it hot enough? Can you wash it 90 degrees Celsius, to basically sterilize it after use, and so on and so forth. So these are also very, very interesting markets also, but sometimes they come with specific requirements. Also food food logistics, food handling, but also there sometimes you're dealing with additional sanitary requirements. We also have certainly some mining business. So where you still have people in mining, that's not big in Switzerland, but around the globe, we have some markets where this is still a significant chunk of the business we do. Yeah, I think those are more or less the main markets, I think.
So do you sell, I mean, maybe you can't answer the question, but do you sell more to like, 50 here, 20 there, 30 there, or you go after a big company? Because I think what happens sometimes too in the US is we were trying to go after the big, 100 company, the big 100 companies in the US, and maybe it's better to focus on some of the smaller companies. I don't know if you could talk about that a little bit, or.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, we're not disclose exact numbers across the board, but we sell everything from between a single unit to a customer to hundreds to a customer. So depending on the size of the customer. But let's say our ambition was also in this regard. So everything has upsides and downsides from a business perspective. But we also wanted, when we founded Auxivo, we wanted to make this technology and the benefits that it can offer more accessible. So this was for us also important. So we tried to offer products as a fair price point. So let's say back when we started, most of the exoskeletons were rather highly priced. And I think then the solutions we developed was, let's say, at least brought some movement into the market to also, let's say, get the prices down, to also make them accessible, not only to the big manufacturing companies like the car manufacturers or something like that, but also ideally to the individual, the independent contractor who depends also, might be actually much more directly affected by any kind of injuries than someone who is employed in a bigger company. So that was also kind of the goal, to really make these products or this technology through the products really accessible to everyone who can benefit. And we are certainly not there yet, but this was kind of, and is the ambition that we have to ourselves to and this being said, this is why we also of course cater to very small companies, independent contractors, to large multinational companies who are then interesting there. And from a business perspective, both has the advantages and disadvantages. As I meant, the small family-owned business, they might make decisions quickly, while the big international company, you go through 10 different layers of management before they are able to basically make a decision. So also from early adopters market, sometimes they are quicker and faster, but sometimes it takes forever. And if you're talking to public companies, typically the processes are rather complex and long. So of course, if you're then successful in closing those deals, it's of course can be a very positive impact on your company. But basically, to answer your question, I think we across the board, small companies, individual contractors, family-owned businesses, and of course also the big multinationals. So I would say we certainly don't have a favorite, but we see need across the board as well, and the processes and the opportunities are of course differently shaped and sized.
Sometimes we hear things like, the exoskeletons, they're hot, like I got to put it on, they're hot, or they're not as comfortable. What do you say to some of those types of people, or how have you worked through, some of those tougher issues, right? I was listening to a talk the other day on people working in the food industry, and they were saying that the people love to wear the exoskeletons during the winter and the spring. But if you're in a warehouse that's, 95 degrees and 90% humidity during the summertime, right? Because the warehouse is not, it's such a big warehouse, they don't have, air conditioning or something for that. So any thoughts there on, people out there might say, oh, I don't know if I want to put this on type of.
No, absolutely. And this is also, of course, something that we encounter, and I'm pretty sure every manufacturer encounters, depending on where you deploy it. In some deployments, of course, this is a little bit more dominant. We have kind of an interesting experience in this field. So if you have the people working in the food industry basically inside a freezer, heat is never an issue. We also have experienced people, for example, working at an airport in 40 degrees Celsius heat outside, which is, I guess, 100 degree Fahrenheit, something like that. They also we expected, okay, they will never ever accept it, but they did not care so much because they said we are sweating anyhow. So this is, it's so this additional equipment doesn't bother me so much, and since it makes my work lighter, so actually it kind of balances itself in this regard. So we face, when addressing the heat issues, we typically have it like at these medium temperatures. So then this one additional layer of equipment that you're wearing with the exoskeleton makes actually a difference. So this is kind of where it becomes then a tricky point. And yes, this is an issue depending on the topics. And of course, what you can do as a manufacturer, you need to make add ventilation as much as possible, add heat management, select materials like in sports gear that either are breathable and you don't sweat so much, but also if you sweat, they can transfer the moisture away from your body. So these are, of course, not novel ideas. They have been in sports clothing and equipment or hiking equipment for quite some time. But of course, we also need to transfer these concepts into the exoskeleton field, use the technology, use the concepts that are out there. And then, of course, also simply reduce the footprint of the exoskeleton on the body as far as possible so that you simply reduce these issues. Comfort is also a topic that's, it's like with clothing as well, or I always compare it with hiking boots or a backpack or something like that. If it doesn't fit well, you will have pressure points. It will cause like that. And the same is with exoskeleton. So the design of the exoskeleton certainly matters, but the fitting at the end of the day might be even more important. And it's, we have the same thing. If you wear a dinner jacket that doesn't fit you well, you are not able to lift your arms, right? But then it's just dinner, so that's not such a big problem. But of course, the exoskeleton typically also transfers high forces between the exoskeleton and the body. So this comfort issue becomes often very, very dominant. And in our experience, you can do a lot with the design of the exoskeleton, the materials that you do, but fitting, sizing is crucial. So, and of course, in this regard, we have in our staff, we have people who used to be tailors and who used to work in this textile design industry to basically all these learnings. Human bodies is very different from each other. There are big difference between male and females, but also within each gender group, you have huge differences, with each country, in Asia, our small size that we offer is typically too large. And in some other countries, it's just a different way around. So this you can address it to a certain point, but of course you will also not ever. We always try, if we come up with these, developed and sizing systems to optimize the fit. We have a couple of standard sizes, and then you have adjustability within each size. And by doing so, we try to offer a good fit really for as many people as possible. For us, let's say we are aiming for 90+% at least that we can make a good fit, and in order to reduce discomfort caused by these kind of pressure points. But it is one of the biggest issues certainly regarding adaptation of exoskeletons, because you will never wear it for any kind of time if you don't feel comfortable in it.
And I think to me, this is an example as to why your very first product was a STEM educational exoskeleton, because this is such a highly interdisciplinary field where, like you just said, you have professional tailors and staff. I think in movies, you would think that an exoskeleton company is a group of 100 or so engineers, and everyone is a mechanical engineer or electronics engineer, when in reality, it's so interdisciplinary, where you have to be able to anticipate from different points of view and from different disciplines on how the exoskeleton needs to be designed, how it will interact, how it will end up being used. So I think that your answers are touching on that. And in proper fit and fitting things correctly has been something on my mind for a while. So we are not there yet, and I don't expect that we'll be there anytime soon. But in my mind, ideally, there should be like a LED light that tells you, oh, this exoskeleton or this exosuit or this wearable has been fitted correctly, and you're going to get the full support and the full output of the device. So as an analogy, at least in the United States, when you're buying respirators, if it's a full face respirator or a half face, you are not allowed to fit it yourself. You actually have someone, a certified external body, that comes to do a fit test. And these things are as simple as 2 straps up to 5 straps. So significantly simpler than the majority of exoskeletons on the market. And they have, through decades of experience we have learned that you need help with fitting it.
I absolutely agree with that. At the end of the day, so you have two options, all right? Two topics that you addressed. The one is also usability, because even if the exoskeleton in theory can be perfectly fit to your individual body, if you don't do it, you will not benefit from it. So, and then the question is, how can we fix this? Either and we see two options, right? And we would like to move from the one to the other over time, more and more. So the first one is, of course, you provide the fitting, you provide the implementation. So no one ever, you don't ship just an exoskeleton and say, hey, good luck with that. You go there, you train them, you fit them, right? It's this, you need to do this, and you need to do this. And this is also our experience, at least depending on you need to do this ideally once or twice. So with a deployment, and with larger deployments, we typically have 2 visits. So we go there, we train them, we train them how to use it, we fit them individually. So we support every individual worker with a fitting, and then we collect their feedback very early on. So to see, does it work, does it not work? And this means let them work a little bit with the exoskeleton, get used to it, get accustomed to it, and then typically readjust the fitting after some time. Just to make sure, the initial impression might not be the first one. So typically people start rather loose, with a loose fit, because this feels more natural and less constraining, if you want so. But over time, they typically don't want to adjust it a little bit tighter because they get a feeling for it. And this is actually it's a new feeling. And we also say to every single worker, you need to kind of relearn how to work, to over exaggerate a little bit here. You need to get used to this feeling of the exoskeleton. Your brain, who has been trained to do this kind of work for decades often, to do it exactly in a new way, you will not retrain your brain within 2 hours. You need to, alter all your motor system, all this motor learning, motor adaptation. It's like learning to use a new tool, right? Learn how to train a tennis play. You need to, if you have your racket in your hand, the first time you will not be able to manage, to control this racket precisely. Your body is not used to it. Your body does not know yet how to do so. And it is a learning process that you need, that you simply need to go through. So we also have this recommendation that start slowly and increase over time. Take a break here and there and get used to it. So that's the one thing that we certainly need to support, this starting phase of each individual user who has never used an exoskeleton, that we are there for the fitting, for the training, for the support, and also make sure they understand that this is a procedure and not a one-off point in time. And of course, this is the one thing, how to deal with these kind of topics. And the other part would, of course, be that we make it simpler and simpler over time, so that there is not basically what you said, right? There is a kind of indicator that shows you that it's fitted correctly, that it's activated correctly, that it's aligned now well with how it should align. And this can be, and this is also, of course, an important part to scale this industry to, so that ideally we get to the point where we ship an exoskeleton out there, and the user might not need actually on-site training, but might be able to work with a video manual or a quick start guide or something like that, and by themselves then be able to adjust it properly, because it's, I would say foolproof, because it's really self-explaining, and it needs to be really of such a high usability that for most people it works intuitively out of the box. And this is hard to do with something that is new. With a shoe, people know how to do it. With a backpack, you instantly know that if it's not tight enough, you have 2 straps here to pull. But with an exoskeleton, that's of course not as intuitive at the beginning. And if we can build devices that nevertheless are as intuitive as possible and as easy to learn as possible, then this is the way to go, and this is also the way to scale.
And I've seen this both in engineering problem and psychology, almost a sociology problem. Tom, I see that you're leaning forward all the time. Did you hurt your back by any chance?
No, well, sometimes my back has been hurting lately, but yes, we always joke around too, that as you get older, you need exoskeletons, and as you get older, it's harder to lift things, harder to do things, and yes, I joke around when I'm out there, working doing some yard work and things, I could use a good exoskeleton.
So I think to me that is one of the psychological barriers, is how to get people in the habit. So get people to realize that this technology exists, get people in the habit of using it. Even for me, where I've been talking and advocating for exoskeleton technology, it is not until recently that I actually got to use one, actually the one that you gave me, Volker. I was washing dishes and the sink is a little bit low here in the US for me. So I always get back pain after about 20 or 30 minutes of washing dishes, which is usually not a problem. But we had a big party with multiple people, so there were a ton of dishes. And then it occurred to me, wait a second, I have a Auxivo suit. I can just, and I've been shown how I can adjust it specifically for a position which is near standing, just slightly leaning forward. Volker has shown me what I need to adjust and what I need to do. And I was blown away. I couldn't believe the difference that it made. So now every time we have a party and I know that I have a lot of dishes that I need to clean, the suit comes out. It has become a habit. But I need to emphasize it took me 9 years of talking about exoskeletons to actually get to really experience it on my own back and to be able to feel that difference. And I think this is a constant communication struggle. Like, how do we communicate to more and more people that we have done work the same way since the start of humanity? I think you mentioned that airplane facility that has been assembling the airplanes with similar ergonomic conditions. So how do we do that communication barrier, that communication challenge? It's like, hey, this exists, it's real, it works.
An interesting point that you addressed there, and I think what you actually, the example you gave is a good example, right? And you need to, ideally, you experience it yourself and you like what you feel. It's that kind of, I think from the very beginning, we thought we need to go to trade fairs. So to get this message out, and we don't need to go to, or we need to go to trade fairs that of people who have never ever heard of exoskeletons. Like, and then at the trade fairs, we ideally can, make them interested, get them intrigued about this when they see it, and this certainly happens. You see people walking by and then, walking by slower and then thinking, what is this now? And then they got curious and they come there. And especially at the very beginning, again, I mentioned we launched in 2020 our first product, which was unfortunate because of COVID and trade fairs were closed. But 2021, 2022, when it started opening up again, we did this, we pushed this quite a lot, that we are able to go to trade fairs. You have been to A&A last year, where the Wearable was embedded with the Exopark as well. And that was quite interesting. So because we went to trade fairs like 2 or 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago by now. And then almost everyone that we talked to was, what is this? What does this do? Why? So it was really, for most of them, it was certainly 99% of the people we talked to were new to the field. Never heard about it, got then curious and interesting. And I think like last year at the A&A trade fair with the Exopark, for me, it was quite clear, obviously, that more and more people actually went there intentionally. So not just walking across the Exopark and got intrigued or curious about it, but people were actually going there because they heard about this before, and now they want to go there to wear one and test one themselves. And then, of course, there was this nice opportunity with many different manufacturers being there. So for the audience, this was a great way to test different models, different types, to learn about the pros and cons of the different concepts and so on. So we need to be out there, I think. And to spread the word, I think the most efficient way, so there are many, many different ways, but I think one of the most efficient way are certainly still, at least for us, also trade fairs, where you can show it, but also demonstrate it and let the user test it. So they have this effect that you felt over your sink, that they have this instantly, so they can, and then it will stick in their, then they will remember it. Then they will have this in the back of their heads the next time they are considering any kind of ergonomic improvements in their workplace or in their companies. And I think it's a, how do you say it in English? It's a, you need to go the miles, and then slowly but steady we get there. I think one trade fair at a time, combined with other activities, of course. I think the awareness certainly has increased significantly over the last couple of years. So this is certainly there. But again, this personal experience, you can watch nice pictures, you can see nice pictures, you can watch nice movies. You can also read, articles about it. And we do all of this as well. And I think this is also important contribution to this. And I also think activities like this podcast here is, I think, a very important contribution. Also hosting it on platforms like YouTube, where new people stumble upon it that might never ever have heard of exoskeletons before, and then start the conversation. So I think this is the way to go. And wherever we can place any kind of information, and I think you actually called it like this very recently, outside of the bubble, of people who already know about exoskeletons, this is how we can progress this industry, I think. This is how can we leave this bubble? How do we reach the people who have never ever heard about it? And I think then by doing so, we will create the awareness, and then we will create the interest, and then we will create the opportunities to provide them these solutions.
And if I'm not mistaken, I think that's why the Assist Suit Association in Japan is doing these free entry events where they go from a different region to a different region in the country. They set up exoskeletons and exosuits and wearables for physical augmentation, and it's free entry to let people come in and experience them. And I've also noticed, and I think that's something that was wonderful at Wearable Europe, the A+A trade fair that you mentioned last year, was that you could try it out in context. Because I think when you have a logistics exoskeleton and you try it out on a clean floor space where you can bend your knees, where you can do a proper lift, which is this like fantasy showroom environment, then I don't think that exoskeletons fully make sense, because you can ask someone to help you lift from the other side. You can bring any type of automation or equipment under the sun. It's when and what they did at the trade fair, it's when you have a crate and you need to put boxes now inside the crate, and you can no longer bend your knees because you have the crate in your way. When you have an overhead compartment, when you have a copy of the realistic work environment, having done manufacturing and manufacturing engineering for years, and it's very similar also in the medical field. People are asking, well, why aren't patients lifted with fewer injuries? It's, well, because you need to think in context of the actual work process, where you have all of that equipment that is in your way, where you have other things happening around you. It's not a clean showroom floor. There's only a few certain ways that you can bend your body in order to get that task achieved. And then I think exoskeletons really shine and make sense.
Absolutely. And I think, what you address is to make the demonstration initially as realistic as possible. It's a good way to start, and also to not only create interest, but also to create a lead if there's one, to, really show someone what it can do. And also I think it touches also upon an important point, is that for any new technology, right, there's still a lot of misunderstanding. Exoskeletons still have this science fiction flair to it, right? And we have sometimes people with, let's say, high expectations, where we also just need to be honest and manage these expectations, where we say, you will not be able to fly with this. You will also not be able to lift so much more weight with it. It's more about, you will get support during your work. You will get support during prolonged leaning and overhead work and repetitive lifting and so on. But that we also present exoskeletons as what they are, by a new tool, a new solution, in sometimes a portfolio of solutions on how you can improve workplace ergonomics and conditions. And also to be very honest about this, they are not a magic bullet or a silver bullet, I think where you say it will solve all your problems, but in certain circumstances they are, and I'm convinced of that, the best available solution that we can offer you. And in other workplaces, in other situations, there are better solutions out there, and also present it like that. Also to the customers, to be open and honest. It's a new technology, and I think this is very important, to also say no to a customer. And basically, if you see the expectation towards the exoskeleton is not matching what we observe during the workplace visit on site, that we also basically recommend against it. And I think this is really important, because if you would basically just push it out there, try to close a quick deal, then this would hurt the industry in the midterm. Because then you would have customers, a good salesperson will be able to sell it, no question about it. But then you will have a customer who feels, who doesn't benefit from it, who doesn't like it, who will, rather say, yeah, this is not what I needed for my situation. And then it will damage the reputation of exoskeletons overall, especially since it's a new solution. And this is, of course, also a risk that just comes with all these new solutions. And for us, we clearly say, let's just be as open as possible towards the customer. Let's show them the opportunities, but also highlight the limitations some exoskeletons might have for certain applications. And then typically, I think we see good success, and the customers appreciate this openness. They also appreciate it. Then they open up about actually considering the exoskeletons really as a pragmatic solution that they can use, or if it's the suitable solution. And that, I think, is also very important to be just open and manage these expectations honestly.
Yeah, and Tom and I have most certainly heard of this. I like to define it as abandonment, or another way of saying it is closets full of exoskeletons where they were purchased and they're no longer being used.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think this can happen. It also certainly also happened to us. But again, by being as transparent as early as possible and also offering the people to test all the exoskeletons, of course, in advance. I think this is an important part to also create realistic expectations there and see the other way and then get realistic expectations, and then the customer or the potential customer can make an informed decision if this is really what helps them or not. And this is so important.
And I think clearly you do some things differently, because I've never heard of a company do a double fitting, which is something that you mentioned earlier, where you do an initial fit and then you come in to do an adjustment. So it sounds to me like Auxivo has figured out how to do something slightly differently from what we're hearing.
I mean, to be fair, we don't do this all the time, but it can be a valuable tool to make sure that the customer or the user in this case actually has the best possible chance of being happy with the exoskeleton they are using.
And I'd like to highlight too, just as part of this podcast and part of this education, we want to get out the success stories. And so Bobby has a really nice article in the digitalforbes.com over the last week or so showing, I think it was 7 or 8 success stories. And so, I challenge the industry to help us put out some, unique success stories and say, hey, this is where we saw these things work. This is where they worked long term. This is where we saw productivity and basically ergonomic success with these devices. So workers were actually a little bit more productive and there was less injuries, right? And I think it was quite interesting, a great article, Bobby. And I think part of this talking today too is about how to make sure that this technology is successful. And so we want to highlight that.
Absolutely. And I remember, Bobby, you have been looking for this very actively also now for quite some time now. I remember last year, I think we connected you with one of our customers in Ireland, right? The farrier that then provided you also with an interview opportunity.
Yes, thank you for that. That was excellent. And I see now more and more companies do that, where they have testimonials of real end users with no technological background, being able to explain from their point of view in their language, from the point of view of their profession, their career, their work experience. What is it that they're feeling, how they discovered this technology, what adjustments they had to make. I think that's a great step forward. And thank you for being really the first to answer the call for that. And what we keep hearing in the United States, and maybe you can comment to that, is this thirst, this desire for long-term longitudinal studies of the impact of occupational exoskeletons.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a general desire, I think, not only in the US. I think that is certainly something that the industry is moving, so must move, but also is moving towards too. Because at the end of the day, what value proposition do we have for the customers? It's, and you have, of course, the short-term effects. They are appreciated. I mean, you have typically, we measure this with any kind of biological measurements like the EMG measurements, heart rate, and so on and so forth. And this is, of course, kind of a first interesting reference to basically showcase that the devices, they actually do what they are designed to do. But if this then has the benefits for the user, this is, of course, then the second step. And some of the things that some of the benefits you simply feel. I mean, humans are really good at perceiving with their body, and this was also some of our advisors initially, ergonomics specialists told us as well, right? The trust to the user. If they tell you trust the user, if they tell you this is good for me, then they will be very, very likely be right. And if they say, oh no, that's not for me, then they will also be very, very likely be right. So this initial feeling, perception of the exoskeleton by your body, does it make your work lighter? Does it reduce your pain? Does it, or add any kind of disadvantages? Does it work heavier? Does it cause you pain, discomfort, sweating, and so on? Listen to the customer, and after using it for a little bit to work with it, 90% they will be able to tell you if it's good for them or not. But of course, that's the first step, and that is of course also important for the individual user. But of course, who are we selling to now as a commercial company? Are we selling to the user, or are we selling to customer? And the user is not always the customer. The independent contractor is there's the user as the customer. So the farrier is if he likes it, if he says, hey, my pain is reduced, I can, I think his example was he was able to lift significantly more donkeys. That's a productivity increase for him, and he feels better. He has a productivity increase. That's very good for him and his business. So he can make the quality decision as a user and as a customer to invest this money, and he has the return of investment. He sees it clearly. But of course, these longitudinal studies are still very important to get there, because this is also an important step for the industry, because at the end of the day, your customer might not be the user, might not be the worker on the shop floor, might not be the construction worker outside on the roof. It might be the owner of the company, and the bigger the company go, we talked about different company size, Tom, before. The bigger the company does, the higher up the decision will be made. And of course, these numbers become also increasingly important. And we have made with many customers very good experience. They listen to the workers. So the decision for exoskeletons or against exoskeletons is often done based on the feedback by the workers. But of course, if then you could then consider a more significant investment, a larger deployment or something like that, then of course you would like to understand your return of investment. And this is where we need these studies to show that they have any kind of benefit that the company is looking for. This can be simpler recruitment because the work is more pleasant, less employee turnover, but also, of course, clearly more monetary incentives or direct monetary incentives. Less sick days if they're causing you costs, depending on the insurance system, or higher productivity that you can then, of course, easily quantify your return of investment if you have this. And to be fair, this is something that needs to be done, but that's a really big project, because you kind of need this, as we discussed also before, Tom. What are the markets, right? There are many different markets, and all of these markets have smaller sub-markets, and for all of the sub-markets we have different exoskeletons kind of categories that we can offer there. So in theory, to fill all the gaps as an industry, we could kind of need this data for all these markets, for all these types of exoskeletons out there, to really understand and quantify this. And of course, this is by its nature a long-term project. But this is also this data that has been floating around there. We have evidence, certainly in some areas. We have also increasing evidence. We have certainly quite some anecdotal evidence. We also have clear scientific evidence by now on health benefits, workload reduction, and that translates then to monetary benefits. But the body of evidence is still today not that broad as we all would like it to be. And that's the nature. And I think this is something that we move as an entire industry, move it together forward together with the companies who invest in this kind of data collection, the research partners, universities and labs that we are working together, who are also very interested in that. And we are also, of course, for example, working together with insurance companies and our customers and health insurance companies, accident insurance companies, to figure out, and we need those partners to also actually get this data. Sometimes it's even more complicated because of data protection rights and so on. If you're talking about medical incidents, no doctor on earth can give you simply this data, because this is private information for the patient. So that are, of course, the challenges that come a little bit with this. I'm not saying this cannot be overcome, but this is kind of the elephant in the room, I think, in the exoskeleton field, right? That this is the big one, that step by step we need to contribute there. And I think this is actually something that the entire field does together. All the companies do together. They contribute bits of evidence here and there. And then I think over time this will support the entire industry to take this gap. And this will be an important milestone to allow the entire industry to reach its full potential.
Yeah. Thank you for all that. thinking about insurance companies, thinking about the data has got to stay private, but also just how do we grow the industry? And some of my thoughts were that, the work in Europe with Exo Workathlon, the Exo Park, the collaboration, I think they have a little bit more so in Europe, is excellent. And I think it's super important. And then I think that article that Bobby wrote where, it starts off, to me, some of the first articles I saw, was some of the work at Toyota saying they couldn't give you exact numbers, but they said that they had significant reduction in healthcare costs. And then there was multiple exoskeleton companies came out with some long-term data. I think that's super important. And then you also lately have had some producers come out, in the food industry and other places saying this is important. Because it gets back to, there was some of those myths. Like Carl Zellick used to talk about, the myths in the exoskeleton industry, because 8-10 years ago, people said, oh, don't put on an exoskeleton because you'll be weaker in the future. And I think, that was a myth in the sense of, because these exoskeletons were never going to give you all of your, lift everything, right? And so we used to joke around to people, the way you become weak is sitting in an office chair doing an office work, right? That's, how you become weak, right? Sitting is the new smoking, they say in the US. So it's interesting things in that area.
I think that specific one that went down a little bit, like do I get weaker? So that I think we have not heard so much in the last 12 months than we did, let's say, 4 years ago. But that was that's the classic. That's the misunderstanding. But again, also I think here it's about, again, also the expectation management and having this. We actually sometimes at least in some languages, initially we avoided about exoskeleton. If we did some early testing in the field just to avoid all of this. This is really because it has this science fiction association for most people still today. So it will lead to very strange expectations and also to these kind of misunderstandings. So we very selectively avoided this at some point in time. At some point in the future, I think it will be just normal. You can use it without any of these associations, or they will ask you, do you talk about an animal or about a device that I can wear? But we are not there yet. So this is certainly something that we, through communication, as you do here frequently, I think we can slowly chip away this misunderstanding.
Right. And I liked also your thinking about that it takes time to learn how to use the device. And so I think sometimes, in the academia, and I'm part of the academia, where you do a 1-hour study, right? You wear the device for a half an hour, wait a half an hour, and then do no device for half an hour. And I think what you talk about, it's like, it's going to take time. It's going to take a couple weeks for you to get used to this device. Then you get used to it, and it's really helpful. So I think that's important. Actually, it was interesting in one of the talks lately I heard, just getting to that, they started saying to people, okay, if you choose to use the device, you don't have to use the device, but if you choose to use the device, we'd like you to use it for 1 month, get used to it. And then if you decide not to use it, don't use it. But we want you to get comfortable with the device first. So I think that's kind of an interesting thing too, that I think people need to understand and hear.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And can I talk about this? Yeah, I think I can. We have actually a study ongoing that is digging a little bit deeper into this, because what we have seen in the past as well was interesting. So we have a biomechanics lab here in our company, and we do like very frequent lab testing as well to, just EMG also as part of the development. If you have a new prototype, you can quickly run the protocol, and then you kind of get at least biomechanical data to understand what happens to the body. Because at the end of the day, the device itself doesn't matter what it does to the body. This is the important part. So this also, Bobby, you met our movement scientists here as well, who are basically running these protocols as part of development and also field testing. But what we have seen actually, so we don't have yet all the data on this one, but what we have seen, if we do in-house tests with novice users who have never used an exoskeleton, and if we do in-house testing with our own team, since they did not run away quickly enough, so they need to participate in the study, then we have seen over time that the support levels that we measure are higher with our team than with the novice users. So also on a biomechanical level, and this is so, let's say, this got us also quite interested over time, where we say, okay, if we run the big scientific studies, we always recruit new users, our support levels are lower than if we were them ourselves, apparently. And this is something now that we actually have a study ongoing at the moment where we would like to actually look into this in more detail. So we have now novice users, at least at the beginning, but they have done, I think, a very intense protocol over a couple of weeks, which also consists of using the exoskeleton at home, frequently conducting additional training to get basically used to it. And then we can do the support level measurements again, after a certain amount of training sessions to see if we can see these kind of learning effects, these kind of adaptations effects. So if this is something that is really, that we just is perceived sometimes, also that after sometimes it just feels natural, but also that your body is really getting more used to actually relying on the exoskeleton. So because they typically support your muscles, right? And if your brain is not used to let go and still activates your muscles, even though there is actually already the support of the exoskeleton, then your workload actually might not go down or not go down as much. But if you then would go through this motor adaptation, this motor learning, where you simplified speaking, your brain then accepts the help of the exoskeleton and lets go, then this is actually something that would clearly show that the support will increase over time due to this training. And this is something that makes a lot of sense. I think we have not found yet so much data on this, so this is why we're running a study now, but it would be interesting to see because it very much matches with what we see, the anecdotes that we hear, and also what we see ourselves. I mean, I wear our exoskeletons quite frequently, and it just evolves over time how you feel in them. That's so interesting.
I believe I've seen one study on this ever in my life but it was a very small sample size, and they demonstrated a starting point, then an increase, then a little bit of a decrease again, but it ended up settling at a higher comfort and measurable assistance from the exoskeleton than the initial use. And for those, because this is 3 bioengineers right now geeking out, for regular listeners, this is no different than learning how to ride a bicycle. There is an adaptation time, or learning how to swim, where you can know the theory about swimming, but at the end of the day, you need to subconsciously be able to make those neural connections to be able to actually float and swim. I've heard similar things for weightlifting, where when you start a new exercise, your first few weeks is not building muscles, but it is just training your mind not to counteract and stop engaging your opposite muscle groups, because you're always activating them in order to maintain balance, not to have your hand just fly off randomly.
This is why the progress slows down over time, so depressingly.
Yeah. So while this may sound complicated, just to emphasize, this is stuff of everyday living. All of us have seen and encountered this. What we're talking about, buying a new car, getting used to the car seat. You might have, especially new car seats, have 9-11 points of adjustment. The steering wheel can be adjusted. You still need that adjustment time to feel comfortable, to make that new vehicle be your new car.
Absolutely. No, it's a very normal process that everything new we do, we need to go through, especially it comes to motor skills and so physical activity, and work is no different in this regard.
Yeah. So to emphasize, it might sound complicated. It isn't. It is stuff of everyday life. Hey, I have no more questions. Thank you so much for your time. You were wonderful. It was excellent to have you on the podcast. Do you have any thoughts, last questions?
No last questions, but would you, Volker, like to any last thoughts or anything that you wanted to say that we didn't ask about, or any last couple thoughts?
No, I think we covered quite a range of topics. So I thank you very much for this invitation and for the work you do. I mean, Bobby, you mentioned, right, it's so important that we, there's still quite a lot of novelty attached to all of these activities that we do, and that we continue communicating this. And so highly appreciated that you do this podcast. And of course, very nice and thanks a lot for this invitation here.
Well, thank you all for your time. Yeah, we really appreciate having you here. Thank you all for listening. We hope that you enjoyed this episode. As always, please support us on Patreon. Even if you're at a free user level, it means a lot to us to know that there's interest and excitement around this. And stay tuned for more on the Exoskeleton Report, the Wearable Robotics website, the upcoming A+A trade fair, and WearCon Europe in 2025 in Düsseldorf. We just had a big meeting, organizational meeting for that right before this podcast. So really exciting stuff coming down the pipeline, and make sure to visit Auxivo.com and stay up to date on what Volker is up to with his team.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot. And see you then, I would say, in Düsseldorf soon.
Yes.
Thank you.